SQL, open up my workbench, and click my instance, and I'm in my environment. You know, as we talked about in one of the previous sections, when you open the workbench, it defaults to having a query window open. We're actually going to use one of these today, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But let's look at that script file. I'm actually just going to close that just to kind of get it out of our way. So you notice in our schemas list, in my copy of Workbench here, the only thing I have is something called sys. And sys is actually the MySQL system database. You rarely ever do anything with that. It's all sort of internal information that the environment uses. So there are some advanced applications that, down the road you may find yourself there. But usually what we're interested in, and we've already seen in a previous module, is our own databases and structures that we build. In a previous video, we talked about how to use the graphic user interface to create a new database and all that. This time, we're actually going to use that script we just downloaded. So we don't have to even know what that script is going to do, other than, obviously I mentioned it's going to build the record store database for us. So the way that I'm going to get to this is I'm going to click File, and there's an option here that says Open SQLScript. I'm going to go to that Downloads folder, and there's that script that I just downloaded, and I'm going to click Open. Now this is quite lengthy. There's a lot of code in here. You don't have to study this. You'll not be required to understand how this works. The only thing I want to do is actually run this. And the way that I run this, you notice I have, it's in its own tab. At the top, there's looks like a little lightning bolt. This will execute a script for us. I'll click that. It runs pretty fast. It's already finished. And in my if you have the output tab open, there's this output, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Again, not worried about you understanding how that works. The only thing you want to check is make sure that you don't see any red X's along the left edge. Some of these look like little warning signs. That's okay, not worried about that. If you see any that show a red X, then something went wrong. And let me know, we can work that out. But for the most part, this has been fairly well tested, so it should be fine. So you notice in the schemas list, it looks like nothing has changed. And one thing that we need to do when we build a database from a script, we need to refresh our schemas list. And it's not super intuitive, but there's this little tiny icon, looks like two arrows. If I click that, you now see that we have a record store database. And if I click the arrow and then the arrow next to tables, there's those tables that we've been talking about. We looked at this in the ERD diagram. We've talked about customers and orders and all those kind of things. If I click on one of these, it actually shows me, if you have the Object Info tab open here at the bottom in your interface, it shows me the field names. These are the attributes that are in that. And I can look at each one of these and see, oh yeah, it actually built something. Not only that, but this script that you downloaded also loaded data, actual data that we can work with in these tables as well. So what I'm going to do is, over on the top left again, there's a little tiny icon that says SQL on it. It's got a plus sign. All that does is give me an empty tab, and it's a SQL tab where I can write SQL code and run it and run that against this database that I'm after. One of the things I want to do is, when you have a lot of databases in the schemas list right now, I only have record store and sys. One thing to help sort of provide focus for this workbench tool is if I just double click on one of the databases, you notice that it now looks bold. And that's considered, Workbench now sees that as the database that I'm focusing on. And that's important because if I start writing some SQL code, and we'll see this more later as well, and I don't specify what database I'm referring to in that code, it won't necessarily know, and I'll get an error message. So it's a quick, simple way to do that. What I'm going to suggest is just, once you have run this script, just type that line, select space an asterisk, which is Shift 8, from customers. And if I click that lightning bolt, You now see there's a new panel that opens, and it's called the result grid, you see right there. And it shows the data that my script automatically loaded. It loaded that based on the script that we downloaded. Again, this isn't something I'm expecting you to study and know how that works, but this is an extremely common way in which we kind of set ourselves up to work with a data set. A data set is usually a set of tables in a database that we work with for different reasons. Okay. In this particular case, we're going to continue with this idea of a record store example and start to learn some basic ways in which we can see what's in this database. And we just did that here with this select statement. And that's going to be the first SQL command that we'll learn shortly, is the select statement. So now that we've run that script, I can actually just close that. I don't need it anymore. So now I've confirmed that I have some data in the tables. I'm going to just go ahead and close this, and I don't need to save it. That's okay. So one of the things about these SQL scripts is that now that you've downloaded this script, anytime that you want, you can rerun this. Meaning, if you go in and you make some changes, and a little bit later, we'll actually be updating data and deleting data and removing, certain columns and adding things and things like that. If you ever need to go back to the beginning, the easiest way to do that is just rerun this build script, because what it does is it will delete the entire record store database and rebuild it from scratch. So you can always come back to this as your beginning point. And this is incredibly valuable when you're writing code and you're testing things, because sometimes it may not work well. And again, this is something that is done in the industry very often. Every place that I've worked, one of the first things I look for is, okay, I need to have a way to set my development environment, but also reset it, put it back into a state that I know is stable, because often when we're writing code, we're trying new things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and that's fine. If you had to do this manually, it would be horribly tedious. As I said, this particular script that builds this is quite lengthy, as you see. And, especially if you're starting in a new company or you're starting in a new project, you wouldn't even know what all that stuff is for yet, right? So, anytime I want to, I can come here and open this script up again and just click the execute. It'll run again. I refresh my list. And now it looks the same as what we just did because we didn't make any changes, but it actually deleted the old copy and rebuilt it from scratch, right? So I always know that I can get back to this point if I ever need to. And again, a little later in the semester, we'll talk about how I might actually update this script for anything new that I might build. Let's say I add a new table, right? I have this new entity that I need to add. And once I've done that and tested it and I know it works and it's functional, then I may want to add that to this script so that when I reset my environment later, that new table is also built automatically for me. And again, we'll look at that a little later in the semester. In the next section, we're going to start actually looking at SQL code, and we'll use this record store database to do that. For the moment, I don't need this script anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. And again, I just want to remind you that anytime you need to start writing SQL code, then you can just click this plus SQL right there. And in fact, you can have many of these open. You notice I have a whole bunch of tabs open. And we'll see actually why we might do that a little later as well. So move on to the next section. Make sure that you can at least see the customers table as I showed you a second ago, and that there's actually data in it. And then when we move into the next tab, we'll actually use this record store database as our source of data to learn the SQL queries.